I balanced the cake with one hand and the small gift-wrapped frame with the other. It was a picture from his 5th birthday, his front teeth missing, frosting on his nose, and both arms wrapped tightly around my neck. I thought he'd smile when he saw it. The door swung open before I knocked. Music thudded from inside. Dylan didn't even look at the cake. "Oh, you made it," he said flatly, stepping aside like I was an unexpected delivery. His wife, Karina, emerged from the kitchen with a wine glass in hand, looking at me the way people look at something they didn't order. "She brought cake," she said to no one in particular, then turned back to the guests. I followed the sound of laughter into the living room. Everything gleamed: white marble floors, glass tables, shelves filled with awards I helped him earn. "Everyone," Dylan called, raising his glass. "Thanks for coming. You being here means everything." Someone shouted, "Speech." Dylan grinned and leaned against the counter. "Honestly, the only gift I want this year," he paused, looked directly at me, "is for my mother to finally kick the bucket." A beat of silence. Then laughter, real, roaring laughter. Karina clapped. "Don't tempt her, she might think it's generous." More laughter. I stood there with the cake in my hands and the gift under my arm. I didn't blink, I didn't breathe, no one looked my way. I walked into the kitchen, set the cake down beside the untouched desserts, and placed the wrapped frame against the backsplash. My hand trembled just once. Then I turned and left without saying a word. I didn't close the door hard. I didn't look back. I just kept walking to the car like it was any other evening, like I hadn't just been told my death would be a gift. As I reached the end of the driveway, I heard Karina's voice cut through the music behind me. "She always makes everything about herself." I paused, hand on the door handle. Of course, that was the story they liked, that I show up to center attention, not to give, that I came for drama, not out of love. No one offered me a chair that night, not even a paper plate. I'd been standing the whole time like a hired server. I drove in silence, headlights brushing across houses with porches full of family. It was early spring, warm enough to keep the windows cracked. The air smelled of grilled meat and distant jasmine. Home was a one-bedroom rental I'd moved into after selling the bigger house. I told everyone it was downsizing. What it really was giving up space I never got to fill. I dropped my purse on the floor and walked straight to the kitchen counter. I took the card out of my jacket pocket. "Happy birthday, Dylan," written in blue ink, the loops of my handwriting still careful, still warm. Inside was the check. $1,500, meant for a weekend trip he mentioned months ago. I remembered skipping dinners out to save that. I remembered opening a separate envelope at the bank so I wouldn't spend it. I took the check out and looked at it once, then I tore it in half, then in half again, then again. Until it was nothing but soft curling bits in my palm. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I just stood there for a long time. When I finally moved, it was to pull out the old ledger, the one where I used to track every dollar I gave him. It was time to add one final line. I sat at the kitchen table with the old ledger open. The pages were yellowed around the edges, numbers neatly penciled in rows that only I had ever cared about. The check was gone, shredded and silent. But the memory of every dollar still lived here in my handwriting. It started with the music lessons. Dylan wanted to learn guitar when he was 10. His fingers were too small, but he loved the sound. I walked to work in the rain for nearly a year because the car needed repairs and I couldn't afford both the mechanic and the instructor. So I kept walking. Then there was college. He got in, but the fees came faster than we'd planned. I opened my jewelry box and stared at the ring I'd worn for 27 years. It wasn't valuable, not really, but it was the last thing his father gave me before the chemo took him. I sold it without telling Dylan. He just assumed the college handled it. The business came after graduation, a cafe he swore would make us proud. It folded within 8 months. I covered the credit cards because he was trying his best and I didn't want him to ruin his name before he turned 30. He never asked how I managed it. Maybe he didn't want to know. One evening, Ruth from next door knocked with a bowl of soup and too much kindness. She looked at the open ledger and the stack of envelopes beside me. "You still supporting him?" she asked softly, eyebrows lifted. I nodded. I promised his father I would. Ruth didn't answer. She just gave a quiet hum, then set the soup down and left. After she was gone, I whispered it again, like saying it made it less hollow. I promised his father. But the promise felt different now, tight in my throat, heavy in my chest, not a vow, a trap. I flipped to the last blank page of the ledger and wrote in steady hand, March 5th, no more funding, debt closed. Then I turned to the filing cabinet and pulled out the property folder. The folder was thicker than I remembered, papers layered with time, contracts, scans of receipts, copies of checks I'd written out in careful script over the years. The deed was still there, right at the top, with both our names typed across the bottom. I'd helped him with the down payment on that house. Dylan said it was temporary just until he got promoted. That was 12 years ago. I opened the folder wider and pulled out the paperwork for the joint account. We called it the just-in-case fund, just in case he lost his job, just in case someone got sick, just in case life went sideways. I had contributed every other month, always quietly. The balance hadn't moved in nearly a year. At least they hadn't gotten to that yet. I sat down with a clean sheet of paper and started writing. Tuition, $18,400. Rent support, $2,008-2012. $31,200. Cafe startup, $22,000. Credit card debt, $11,700. Wedding contributions, $16,800. House down payment, $65,000. Baby expenses, $5,400. Other miscellaneous, $53,500. It came out to $224,000. I stared at the number like it was a stranger. I couldn't believe I'd written that much away from myself. I folded the list, crisp and even, and slid it into the property folder. Then I opened the small drawer near the back of the cabinet and took out a tiny silver key taped to the inside wall. I hadn't touched it since Gerald passed. The storage unit still held his records, old ledgers, a few sealed boxes labeled in his tidy print. I'd left them there like tombstones I wasn't ready to visit, but now I needed to know what he left behind. Gerald was always 10 steps ahead. He never liked Dylan's tone, even back then, and he was careful in ways I hadn't been. I held the key tight in my palm, then I dropped it beside the list. My heart was calm, not angry, just ready. I turned out the light in the room and went to pack a small overnight bag. Ruth met me in the parking lot of the bank. She didn't ask questions, just walked beside me the way real friends do, quiet but unshakable. I had the folder under my arm, the one with the account details and co-ownership documents. I'd looked through them 3 times last night just to be sure. Inside, I signed my name on the form the teller slid across the desk. She tapped a few keys, brows lifting slightly. Yes, Mrs. Hart. As a joint account holder, you're fully authorized to transfer or withdraw these funds. $14,260. I moved every cent into my private account. The new balance showed up in neat black numbers on the screen like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Ruth and I didn't celebrate, we just walked back out into the daylight like it was any other Thursday. Next stop was the lawyer's office. The receptionist offered water. I declined. I sat across from a man who looked half my age and twice as confident. I handed him the deed copy and said simply, I want to know what I still legally own. He flipped through the pages, made a few notes. You're still on title. If they refinance, they'll need your consent. If they sell, they'll need your signature. I nodded. And if I want to relinquish ownership entirely, your call, he said. But don't do it without getting your share. I thanked him and left. That night I sat at the kitchen table again, the ledger still open to the last entry. I turned my phone face up to check the time. That's when I saw it. A message from Dylan, sent 2 months ago. Hey, need help covering the baby shower? Just a few thousand. No greeting, no please, just the same old ask. I placed the phone screen down, stood slowly, and walked to the drawer where I kept my keys. Tomorrow, I'd be driving to the storage unit. I sat at the dining table just after midnight, the house still and waiting. The blank page in front of me wasn't intimidating, it was freeing. I titled the letter plainly. Termination of financial involvement. There was no emotion in the wording. No anger, no apology, just clarity. I listed each step I had taken, the account closure, the pending legal claim on my share of the house, the date I'd stopped supporting any ongoing expenses. At the end, I signed my name slowly, once. Then I printed 2 copies, one for him, one for my file. The next morning I drove to the storage unit I hadn't visited in over a decade. The lock clicked open with surprising ease. The air inside was dry and undisturbed. Most of the boxes were labeled with Gerald's handwriting, neat block letters with a red underline for anything sensitive. I knew exactly what I was looking for. Tucked between two insurance folders and a small metal box was a slim red binder marked Plan B, Hart Holdings LLC. Gerald had created it when Dylan was still in college, during a time when things already felt off. He had whispered, "Just in case, it's in your name, one day you might need something that's yours." That day had arrived. Inside the binder were transfer instructions, dormant bank accounts, and a list of potential contacts, people Gerald had trusted. It wasn't a fortune, but it was clean, untouched, and fully mine. I took only the binder and locked everything else back where it belonged. Back home, I placed the formal letter and a printout from the binder into a manila envelope. On the front, I wrote in black ink, "Dylan Hart." I didn't include a note. By sunrise, Ruth's car was already idling at the curb. I stepped out with my bag and got into the passenger seat. On the way, we stopped by Dylan's house. I slipped the folder into his mailbox before returning to Ruth's car. Neither of us spoke for the first hour. The road stretched open and quiet as we crossed the state line into Georgia. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, thinking of Savannah. The envelope waited on their kitchen counter for 2 days before Dylan opened it. Karina thought it was another card. She laughed when she saw no return address, no handwriting beyond his name in neat black ink. He didn't open it with care. He tore the flap and pulled out the papers like they meant nothing. The first was the legal termination of co-ownership, her signature clear, dated, notarized. It meant she no longer claimed the property, but it also meant she'd filed for her full equity. Next came the bank statement. Account closed, zero balance, the final withdrawal highlighted and initialed. The third sheet was a typed list titled in bold, "Every dollar you forgot to thank me for." Each line broke something open. Guitar lessons, $2,400. College fees, $18,400. Business bailout, $22,000. Wedding venue deposit, $6,500. Emergency dental, $1,300. Groceries, 2010-2012, $3,200. It ended at the bottom with a total $224,000. No commentary, no accusation, just a tally. And then there was the photo. Dylan, 2 years old, fast asleep in her arms, drooling onto her shoulder, his tiny fingers curled around the strap of her overalls. That was all. No handwritten note, no message. Karina rolled her eyes and muttered, "How dramatic." But her voice cracked the next morning when the realtor called. The financing Dylan had applied for, a remodel loan based on joint equity, was denied. The new deed, now missing her name, dropped their available equity by almost half. "You'll need to reapply, resubmit, and wait." Karina stared at the screen, stunned. She pulled out at the worst possible time. Dylan didn't speak. He was still holding the photo. Karina took it from his hands and dropped it face down on the counter. Across state lines, I was walking through the halls of an old house in Savannah, one I'd just rented for the year. Ruth had already claimed the sunroom. I stood in the kitchen, sunlight hitting the sink, and unpacked one last box labeled in Gerald's handwriting. "Start fresh." The first voicemail came on a Tuesday afternoon. Dylan's voice was stiff, forced, casual. "Hey Mom, just checking in, wondering if we could talk, no big deal." By Thursday it changed tone. "We're kind of in a tight spot right now. I didn't realize the loan wouldn't go through without your info. Just call me back, okay?" I didn't block the number. I didn't delete the messages. I just let them sit there like unread letters from someone who only remembered me when things broke. Karina tried next. Hers was sharper, thinner. "If this is some kind of punishment, it's cruel. You've made your point." I was in the backyard watering the rosemary bush Ruth insisted on planting. I let the phone ring out in my pocket. Savannah was quiet in the mornings. The house had wooden floors that creaked when I walked across them barefoot. The air smelled of sea salt and old stories. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine. Every Tuesday and Friday, I volunteered at the community center down the road. 2 girls, Nia and Eli, had taken a liking to me, bright-eyed, fast talkers, always hungry to learn something. One afternoon, Nia asked, "Were you always this calm?" I smiled into my coffee and said, "No, but I earned it." Gerald's safety fund, Hart Holdings, was still untouched when I found it. I used a portion to create something new. The Hart Grant, a small scholarship for single mothers going back to school. The first 3 checks had already been sent. Sometimes I caught myself smiling without realizing it, the kind of smile that starts at the ribs and works its way up. Not performative, not polite, real. I kept the photo of Dylan in a drawer not out of bitterness but memory. He was someone once, someone small, someone I carried. Now he was someone learning to stand on his own. Ruth brought in a stack of envelopes and handed me one with no return address. I opened it and unfolded the letter slowly. I recognized the handwriting immediately. The message came in the form of an email. The sender's name stopped me cold. Lana Hart, Dylan's daughter, my granddaughter. I hadn't heard her voice in over a year. Subject line, "Are you okay, Grandma?" I clicked. "Grandma, why don't you visit anymore? Dad says you're mad at us." "I miss you. My birthday's coming up. I still have that book you gave me, the one with the girl who talks to horses. I read it all the time. Please write back." Lana, I read it twice, then again. Her words were simple, but they cracked something in me that had hardened too long. She wasn't part of what had happened. She was a child trying to make sense of adult silence. That night I sat down and wrote back. "Dear Lana, thank you for writing to me. I miss you too. I think of you often, especially when I see wildflowers. Do you still pick the yellow ones like we used to? Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt, even when we don't mean them to. I needed to take a break, not from you, but from some things that were breaking my heart. That's not your fault, it never was. I live in a little house now near the water. It's quiet and I have a garden with mint and basil and too many birds. I'm sending a picture of it with this message. Maybe one day you'll see it for yourself, but only if it feels right. You are loved always. Grandma Isella." I attached the photo, a shot Ruth had taken of me on the porch, mug in hand, morning sun on my face. No sadness in it, just peace. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't check for one. Some things are sent into the world not to be answered, but simply to be said. The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address. Dylan opened it at the kitchen table, Karina watching from across the room with narrowed eyes and crossed arms. Inside was a single black folder. Tucked inside it, a legal copy of my will, clean, notarized, final. His name wasn't on it, not once. Below that was a small card in my handwriting, nothing flowery, just this, the gift you asked for. I granted it, the version of me that lived for you, she's gone. He didn't say anything, didn't even move at first. Karina snatched the folder from his hands, flipping through the pages, searching for something that wasn't there. He walked away without answering her questions. That same morning, I stood in the cemetery a few miles outside Savannah, where Gerald rested beneath an old oak tree. I'd brought fresh flowers, white ranunculus, the kind he always said looked like quiet strength. I knelt and placed them beside the stone, brushing away the leaves. "I kept the promise," I whispered. But then I made one to myself. The sun was still low in the sky, the world wrapped in that soft golden hush. I stayed there a while, not out of sadness but presence. The woman who knelt at that grave wasn't the same one who stood beside Dylan's birthday cake a year ago. That woman had been trying to be invited, trying to be loved back the way she gave. That woman was gone. What remained was quieter, firmer. Whole. I walked back to the car, unlocked the door, and slid behind the wheel. My phone buzzed once in the passenger seat. Another unknown number. I let it ring. Then I turned the ignition, pulled onto the road, and drove.